Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are looking at a very interesting conversation that has been going on, but we still have to stress the importance of this particular topic today. We are looking at state torture in Uganda and the lack of accountability in regard to the same. I want to welcome Milton Alimadi, who's joining us for the first time. I'm glad we are having you today. Now, Milton Alimadi is a publisher, Black Star News, and adjunct professor of journalism, Columbia University. He's been a voice of, he's made noise, if I could borrow that word, on state accountability, especially in everything that they do. But in particular today, looking at torture, we have made headlines world over. Yes, in the last few or so days. Critics as well have had the government on the back foot following the release of author Kakwanza Chirabasheja. He's been in detention since the end of last year, during which time he claimed he had been tortured by state agents and had the scars to prove it. Yes, we have seen the scars. We have had his story. We've, been told all these things, and it ceases being news that Uganda and people that oppose anybody in power, for example, if I can use that, ends up in the wrong hands. Yeah, so let's delve into that. But I want us to look at, what does the law say? We know that there is a law against torture in Uganda. Now, the Uganda Constitution provides that no person shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. On 26 June 1987, Uganda ratified the United Nations Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. The provisions of this convention were then made into a law in Uganda. So, how did we end up here with all these laws in place? How do we find ourselves looking very ugly on the outside, even on the inside, while we claim to be a democratic government? I am glad we have the ambassador, Ambassador Henry Mayega, Deputy Head of Mission, United Arab Emirates. He's here with us, and he's been regular panelist here. Ambassador, we look very funny right now as a country. We don't look at anything good. Everybody is pointing fingers at us as a country. And of course, these are stories that have been going on for a long time. These are cases that have been going on for a long time and have never been ruled on, have never been, said, okay, we are done with this, we have accountability, and this is what happened. Ambassador, how did we arrive at this?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this talk show, especially when we're talking about things that affect our country. That is a plus in as far as we are concerned, and in our continuous process to find solutions to problems that face the country. Of course, discussions have to be part of that very process we are talking about. But your question, Lynn, is very leading. How did we end here? Where have we come from? Because for us to understand where we are, I think it is important for us to appreciate the journey that we've made. Should I say that from 1986, or should I say from 1962 as a country? Of course, massive improvements have been made in as far as observing human rights in our country is concerned. For instance, not aware of a country, of a former government that has outmarched the National Resistance Movement government in terms of observing human rights. Of course, some will not agree with what I'm saying, but there were times that the country went through massive violations of human rights. You can talk about, for instance, the 1970s, when it wasn't even possible for us to discuss anything to do with the violation of human rights and part of the 1980s. Yes, it is true that, of course, sometimes where we are, it becomes very difficult for us to come to terms with some errant personnel, for instance, in security forces that may do the kinds of things that are not expected to be done to individuals. That definitely becomes a black spot on us. But the fact of the matter is that we have made tremendous progress in our journey towards observing human rights. Where we are, yes, we have all sorts of bodies that were put in place, and they are constitutionally in place. You can talk about the Uganda Human Rights Commission, whose job it has been ever since this administration, the Yoweri Museveni administration, put it in place, to namely make sure that there is strict observance of human rights. But of course, here and there, you find that there are some violations, but not to the extent of the 1970s, for instance, when it wasn't even possible to talk about human rights violations inside the country, but rather in exile. That had been the norm, that you wouldn't have an opportunity to talk about these violations. But here we are talking about these, in my view, a few cases of human rights violations. I don't want to say that they are anywhere comparable to the situation as it was in the 1970s and in the early 1980s. So where we are, of course, there are going to be always these kinds of errant officers, not many in numbers, of course, doing the kinds of things which have happened right now as we speak. But what, in my view, what is most important is for us to have mechanisms of correcting these mistakes which are being made. And I don't want to believe that the situation is as bad as it was in the 1970s and in the early 1980s, when it wasn't possible for even an opportunity like this to talk about these things. So, yes, we are where we are. Lynn, I agree. Of course, I don't want to quote the example of, is it Kakwenzi, something of somebody called Kakwenzi who went through what he did. But of course, we also must appreciate the fact that nobody has got that wide latitude to insult others in our country. Because you see, we are not in Europe, we are not in the Americas. We are in Africa, where age must be respected. And of course, even leadership has to be respected. So if you go about writing all sorts of things against leaders, and then you find yourself in a problem, of course, you also take part of the blame. We're supposed to respect each other. We definitely have to have different opinions, political opinions, especially if it's economic opinions. Of course, those don't attract as much attention as the rest of the things, especially the political ones. But in the process, in my view, as we continue on this political journey of ours as a country, and as we continue to talk about human rights, there is also need for people to respect others, so that you do not either take a pen and a paper and you begin to insult others and you think that you will just walk out of these situations scot-free. It's not like that. So this is Africa and this is Uganda, of course, where we respect age, we respect leadership. And therefore, as such, yes, you may have your different political opinion, like Kakwenzi had. You may have your own ways of doing things, but of course, steer clear of insulting others. You have no right to insult me, not any single one, to insult me and use abusive language against me as a result of us having political differences, or actually me being in leadership. That wide latitude, in my view, shouldn't exist. Of course, you're free to write as you wish, and you write, for instance, about the kinds of bad things that are happening in the country. You can take the case, for instance, of corruption, write about it, write about all sorts of things that have gone astray, have gone haywire in as far as running the country is concerned, but steer clear of insulting those who are especially using very crude language, because that is not African in my view. It's not African to insult others, but it is also African to respect others. In the meantime, I just want to stop here.
Right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Henry Mayega. Kakwenza Ruchirabashaija.
He knows it.
Now, Kakwenza was charged with offensive communication and was arrested on 28th December 2021 on allegations that he willfully and repeatedly used social media to disturb the peace of the president. You mentioned that everyone has a right to, I like that you highlight that you have a right to rights to, that we pay attention to. But then you also mentioned that he abused his rights. Which rights? Anyway, it's a whole story that has been going on, and these are recurring credible accounts of forced disappearance and torture, not only Kakwenza, very many people by security forces, which does not reflect, good on the government. Milton, Alimadi, you've been calling for accountability, you've been trying to get the government to account for its either mistakes or whatever, and you've heard from the ambassador. Do you agree? We are an African country, but if I have a right to do whatever I have to do, must you then abuse my right?
Thank you for hosting this important program. Good morning to everybody that is on. I am sure, I don't know the ambassador, to be honest with you, but I think he must be a better human being relative to the words he just said this morning. I'm quite sure of that. I'm sure if he was not ambassador representing Uganda, he would not have said the words he said today. But obviously, when we are dependent on a paycheck, there's some things we have to say to fulfill the obligation of that position. Number one, the ambassador knows Kakwenza's name. So when he's going through that act of saying, is it Kakwenza, is it Kakwenza, that itself speaks very loudly about his character. The whole world knows who Kakwenza Rukirabashaija is, including the ambassador. So a part of me feels very sorry that an individual who's probably very well informed, very well educated, and is probably a decent human being, has to say some of the things he said today. First of all, the Europeans colonized Africa, exploited Africans, committed genocide against Africans to partition Africa, because they made the argument that this is Africa. So they don't deserve the kind of human rights that Europeans deserve. And that was their rationale for abusing, for killing, and for exploiting Africans. So to see an African brother making that same argument, I feel the pain. I feel the pain intensely. And I ask myself, how have we arrived at this moment when an African who's probably a decent human being can make this such argument to fellow sisters and brothers? We are not in Africa. You are not allowed to insult somebody. Otherwise, you will be tortured. Your back will be stripped of flesh. Your thighs will be stripped of flesh using a plier. You will be beaten until you are unconscious. And then you will be released and your passport detained. And you are the one who is put on trial instead of the people who almost killed you. Why? Because you insulted a senior person who is the leader. When the whole world knows that this senior person does not hesitate to insult anybody. He calls other Ugandans swine. He calls other Ugandans idiot, this dictator running the country. He calls other Ugandans tumbafu. He calls other Ugandans killers. And he expects Ugandans not to insult him? What kind of nonsense is this? And then the learned ambassador, who, as I said, is probably a very decent human being, if you are not getting a paycheck from the regime, goes on to say we should be thankful that we can discuss these issues today. Therefore, this is an improvement from the 1970s, an improvement from parts of the 1980s. sisters and brothers, all of us on this show today know that this regime may have had a mission, a clean objective to take the country to another place. But that mission went off course after the first 10 years. Everybody knows that. That is why people like Dr. Besigye is no longer a part of this regime. This is a reason why people like General Muntu is no longer a part of this regime. This is a reason why so many historical founders are no longer a part of this regime. They did not sign up to be a part of the kind of atrocity we see in Uganda today. Yes, they thought there would be a vast improvement over the government of Milton Obote. Nobody goes and hides in the bush and sacrifices their life unless they believe the cause. They succeeded. They overthrew a government that my own father was actually a part of. And they made promises. This is what we are going to do in Uganda. We will never go back to the days of killing without accountability. And people believe them and embrace them. And the first 10 years, they seem to be on that mission. Anybody who denies that that mission did not go astray is not an honest person. So now today in Uganda, if you took a survey and say human rights today in Uganda compared to any other part of our history, we know what the outcome would be. People would say we are at the worst point in our history in terms of human rights in Uganda. And that is why the landed ambassador has to go back and say, oh, we are much better than the 1970s. Oh, we are much better than the 1980s, so we should be happy. And at the end of the day, we should remember we are Africans. We don't deserve the kind of human rights that is enjoyed in Europe. What kind of argument is this? I submit with all honesty, if the ambassador was not a part of the regime, he would not be saying the things he just said this morning. I would hope he's a much better human being, and I'm sure he's a much human being. That's my response.
Thank you very much, Milton, for that. Ambassador, today you seem to be under attack, but it's okay. You're used to these things. You've been a panelist here.
It's not a personal attack.
So you know what to tell you.
I've been in the trenches for a very long time. It doesn't come as a surprise. We're in the trenches right now, and I'm part of the government of President Yoweri Museveni. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, he says it is not personal, but let's move on. Miriam Kyomugasho is part of AFRICC USA, and she's been a panelist here on the show. Miriam, we have had Kakwenza's story. It's not the first one. We've had different accounts of people being, detained in Communicado. We've had people being tortured over the years. But also, I want to know, are these people always detained without legal basis? Is it that they are innocently, detained, or do they actually commit certain crimes, and for that matter, are detained? Though it is not the right way of detention, would you say that these people are detained without legal basis?
Really, thank you so much, and thank you, panelists. I think using the word detention is what we are not using here in the case of Kakwenza or other people who were kidnapped. This is not detention. This is not normal detention, where the police comes and say they have arrest warrant and they say, oh, you are suspected for A, B, C, D. Come to police and make a statement, or tomorrow you are produced in court. The constitutional way of detaining suspects is so clear in, and you are not supposed to stay in custody beyond 48 hours without appearing to court. Your family is supposed to be informed, your lawyer is supposed to be in the know. So everything is so clear how you detain suspects. And mark the word suspects. You are not a criminal until court pronounces itself on your case. So what happens in this case and what NRM government does is kidnapping people. They kidnap you, they come and raid your home, with for the case of Kakwenza, it was he said there were like more than 3 cars or military vehicles, and there were more than 20 soldiers who raided his home, grab you, kidnap you, and push you in a car. They don't tell you where you're going. They don't tell you what crime you've committed. They go and detain you in some dungeon. They beat you up. Your lawyer doesn't know where you are. Your family doesn't know where you are. If Lynn, you were attentive, you know that for the case of Kakwenza, there were so many, are they called habeas or corpus? The whatever, I don't know how they pronounce that thing in Italian. The legal way, the lawyer goes to court and demand that you are produced wherever you are, because he was nowhere, even in the normal detention centers, and mark the word normal. So what is happening here? There are kidnaps, arbitrary arrests where people are beaten. That is not illegal. That's not illegal in Ugandan law books. So what has happened is like the government is high-handedly grabbing hand whoever they suspect in their own thinking, whoever they suspect to be a criminal. They kidnap you, they take you wherever they take you, they throw you in a dungeon, they beat you up. I mean, that's nowhere in law books, and I think the ambassador knows that is. I mean, we are not trying to compare with whatever Idi Amin did, because we thought we are no longer in the 19th century or 20th century, whatever. It's like Milton said, even Africans. It's like the ambassador thinks that Africans don't deserve any right, even to be human. That you can be treated like an animal, even animal rights, food without any normal conditions, they would be on your case. So Ugandans today are being treated in below human standards whenever the government suspects you. And remember, this is not Kakwenza alone. If you are listening to his conversations or other conversations of other people like Maseleka who appeared in parliament, Maseleka is the leader of NUP in Kasese. He was grabbed from home and detained for more than a month in a place where he was not known. He was beaten until when he was rotten, and then somehow maybe he had to be produced so that he doesn't die. How many people are in such a detention centers? And I don't want even to call them detention centers. They are like torture houses. How many people are in such a torture houses? How many torture houses do we have? How many people are being grabbed by the government and being thrown in such a dungeons? I mean, how do you justify that, ambassador? How can you say the government has a right to do that? How, if Kakwenza insulted anybody, I don't think that insulting someone, even you deserve to be treated like that. What if he did, and maybe he deserved some sort of punishment? Where is the legal due course? And what about other people who were kidnapped like Masereka? Those places, if you hear the stories of all these people, they tell you that the places where they are detained, there are so many other people in those rooms who are also being tortured, who are also being abused, but we don't know their names. Maybe we know Kakwenza because he was a bit prominent compared to the others. What about other people? What have they done? What is their fate? And why are they being treated in such a manner? Why is the government torturing and detaining people incognito? What is going on?
Right.
You want me to answer?
Thank you, Miriam. There's a lot of anger going. Yes, Ambassador, I'm sure you can hear all this, but we have a law. Actually, we have laws. Uganda, first of all, ratified the UN human rights law. This, laws and do we opt for this, these methods? Is it because people are the courts of law not, meting justice? Are they not giving out justice? Are we afraid that if we take the legal direction, we might not get justice? So if I wake up one morning and just abuse anybody on the way, am I also, is everything okay? Have we gone awry as a country? Have we gone mad as a country? Are there no for more better ways of dealing with you offending me, for example. If your ambassador offended me, must I make noise about it, or must I come and attack you from where you are? Are there no other alternative routes for us to use? Now, Ambassador, you've heard from Miriam and Milton. We have over the years seen that these people are allegedly committing offenses, and most of them have not been brought before court for prosecution. A few of them are sent to different courts, court martial, blah, blah. But when we keep asking ourselves, surely, are there what laws? They say offensive communication, but then they're never justified before the courts of law, so we don't know. Are these detentions meant to, and torture, of course, are they meant to intimidate, persecute, and weaken anybody that is in the opposition?
Well, thank you very much. We don't live in a situation where we don't know what's happening in the world. Arrests are normal. Let's take the case. I want to give an example, because I think most of the people in the diaspora, quite a number of them stay in the US and others in Europe. But take the case of the US, where they've been running the Guantanamo Bay and they've been using waterboarding. And so there's people want to make us believe that these kinds of things, I'm not, of course, trying to justify torturing Ugandans, those especially who have been arrested, which some have chosen to call kidnaps. Fine, it's just a matter of conjecture. We may change words, but the fact of the matter still remains that as long as you're going to step on the due process of the law in the country, definitely you must face the consequences. That is for a fact. Now, Guantanamo Bay has been, for me, as far as I'm concerned, has been a very interesting one, because some of these individuals who stay, especially in the Western world, would want us to believe that the kinds of arrests and the incarceration that happens in the world is not replicated in the rest of the places in the globe. Guantanamo Bay is a very good example as far as I'm concerned, because the Americans have actually been incarcerating a number of people there. And some have alleged that in Guantanamo Bay, people have been subjected to waterboarding, which in their view is torture. So torture in itself is not a good thing. But of course, these are things which happen also in the Western world, where most of these people in diaspora are actually making these kinds of noises. In as far as what's happening in Uganda, which is okay. We can talk about these things, but of course, I'm not trying to justify that when some are tortured in Uganda, that then makes it the right thing to do, because the President Yoweri Museveni has been very clear about this. He says he doesn't support torture, and I'm happy to remind our listeners again that there are quite a number of pieces of legislation that have been put in place in Uganda. Those who care to stay in Uganda and also visit and find out what's happening in Uganda, because there are quite a number of pieces of legislation that have been put in place in order to protect the rights of Ugandans. And secondly, there are also institutions that have been put in place, for instance, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, to address these kinds of things. And from time to time, and I think on an annual basis, the Uganda Human Rights Commission issues reports about the status of these things. And I also want to remind ourselves the fact that the situation definitely has improved from what it was in the 1970s, although I see quite a number of panelists participating in this talk show today, talking things which are contrary to this point of view, that actually human rights situation in the country is, yes, there are these things of Kakwenza which have happened to the country and quite a number of others, but the fact of the matter is that the human rights situation in Uganda has improved remarkably. And unfortunately, the good thing is that all of us have lived in Uganda for quite a bit of time, and so we can compare what happened in the 1970s, what happened in the 1980s, and what is happening now. Of course, it's unfortunate that some of these things are happening in the country. And now, having said those, because I want to respond to quite a number of things which have been mentioned, in as far as this topic of ours is concerned, that basically Muntu left the NRM fine. You see, this is the beauty of political parties, because a political party, in my view, and I think in the view of all right-thinking Ugandans and the rest of the global citizens, parties are not supposed to be prisons. You can enter, you can get out. Everybody in this country has have actually been part of these political parties. Many of the leaders, for instance, of the NRM were in the UPC, others were in the DP, but they got out and formed another political party. So for me, it doesn't come as a surprise that Besigye and Muntu left the national resistance movement. And of course, the exodus will continue. It's not a surprise. Personally, I used to be in UPC. I left. It wasn't a prison. So to bring out the fact that since Besigye and Muntu left the NRM, and therefore it has now become a shell of itself, or a shell of what it was, a caricature of what it was in the past, is, I think, to miss the point, because political parties, in my view, are not supposed to be prisons, because people can get, the gates, in other words, are open for everybody to get out. Otherwise, if the worst thing that happened to Uganda was actually NRM and President Yoweri Museveni, then that would have meant that the people of this country, the people of our country, the people of Uganda, the citizens of Uganda, wouldn't have been voting Museveni over and over again. Of course, Milton is laughing, but that is the fact of the matter. You will, of course, allege that the voting has been rigged in most of these cases. Fine, that is an African thing also, because you're
the one who said it. I never said it.
Listen to me, because I listened to you. Give me a chance. You see, this is the intolerance of people who subscribe to the opposition in Uganda, because you don't listen. When you were speaking, I didn't interrupt you. You finished. So leave me talk, and then probably you can respond. So a political party, in my view, is not a prison. Somebody can be a member of the DP, can be a member of the NRM, can be a member of the FDC. How many people, for instance, okay, Besigye and Muntu were in fact, to shoot down your very argument, Besigye and Muntu were in FDC. Besigye still subscribed to the FDC, but he has formed another political grouping that I understand is supposed to take part in the elections that are going to come probably in 2026. Now, Muntu was part of the FDC, but he has left and formed his own political party. So your argument you're raising, Milton, in my view, doesn't hold in the water, because political parties are not supposed to be prisons. We are not supposed to be under incarceration. I can step into a political party, I can become a member, and then tomorrow, once I feel that the situation there, the situation that is obtaining in the NRM or the DP or the UPC does not really support the views that I have, then that is the time for somebody to leave. And therefore, I don't want to even belabor that anymore, because political parties, in my view, are not supposed to be prisons. So people can step in, they can become members of other political formations, if should they wish. So, and therefore, in my view, I think people are free to belong wherever they want. Now, if some want to assume that actually I can't be in a political party and therefore it becomes a prison and I can't step out, I think that is not democracy. And I don't believe that is what obtains even in the US, where democracy has been existing for the last 250 years. There have been only two political parties, the Republicans and the Democratic Party. But the fact of the matter, which I want to stress, is the political parties are not supposed to be. The other one which I want to raise is about the kidnaps, because this argument has been with us for quite a bit of time. And so the opposition in the country, the narrative of the opposition about these kinds of things is that people have actually been kidnapped. In my view, these are not kidnaps. Of course, the process of arresting these, so to speak, people who have crossed the red lines of the law, probably the process has been handled not in accordance with the law. That definitely has happened. And there's no doubt about it. But my president has been very forthright as far as that is concerned, because he has said he doesn't support torture. And besides that, these are not kidnaps. Of course, the process raises a number of questions, because people are arrested and then they're put in ungazetted areas. And then, fortunately, they have been produced in the courts of law. And in my view, that is a plus again to our democracy in the country, because in the past, you just disappear completely.
Ambassador, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you said these are not kidnaps, but people disappear and we do not know until people have 2 weeks later, a month later, is when they're produced before court. Honestly, wouldn't you call that kidnap?
No, I don't want to refer to that as kidnap, because I mean, the same thing has actually been happening in the US itself, which is most democratic in my view in the world. And I gave the example of Guantanamo Bay, where people got incarcerated for even years. You're talking about 2 weeks. You know, America has been at the game of democracy for a very long time, but still the perfection of democracy in that country has not come that softly, that easily. Yeah, and I don't want to believe, and you should also, because you see, it becomes extremely difficult because you must, well, once somebody is picked, of course there are issues, because somebody is supposed to, according to the constitution, somebody is supposed to be produced in court in the next 48 hours. But this has taken a little longer. Probably that has come as a result of the kind of investigations that people have been doing. Of course, even the question, I mean, the issue of torture, in my view, I don't think I support it. I don't support. Unfortunately, my president has come out and I've said this. I've said this before, that I don't support torture, and the president has also said it, that he doesn't support torture. So probably there are also errant personnel within the security forces who probably would want to give a bad name to the processes of arresting people who cross the red lines of the law. So the matter, as far as I'm concerned, the issue here is for us to continuously ensure that when these arrests are done, I don't want to call them kidnaps, they are actually in accordance with the law. For me, that is the best argument that I can make this afternoon.
Which law? I'm sorry, Ambassador Henry Mayega, I don't know. Which law is that? You're saying these arrests are in accordance with the law.
Of course,
yes, the law is against torture.
No, of course, I can mention because the most important law in the country, of course, is the Constitution, which talks about all these things. But besides the Constitution, and of course, all the rest of the laws must be in accordance with the Constitution. That's why I kept referring to the law. In other words, I'm referring to the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, but I'm also referring to the other pieces of legislation that have been put in place in accordance with the Constitution.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Milton, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
We have heard from the ambassador, we've heard from Miriam, and I know you have your own, we are saying that, let me just give you something brief here. The Human Rights Commission recommended that the DPP prosecutes the perpetrators. This was following a recent investigation they did, and they called on the DPP to prosecute the perpetrators. But all those have been unsuccessful. And at some point, the DPP seems not interested in prosecuting law enforcers that are behind this. There has not been any prosecution successful against perpetrators of these different, crimes. And the ambassador keeps saying that we have errant individuals in government, in security forces. So would you agree with the ambassador that we have actually these errant officers, and therefore we're paying
Okay, very good. So of course, the response to that question is no, and I'll explain. But before I explain, with your permission, I would like to offer a question to the ambassador, because he spoke about the issue of prosecution of errant individuals. Kakwenza Rukira Bashaya, the victim of this vicious torture, has alleged that the individual who was in charge of this torture, directing the torture, and actually came and spoke to him while he was still a victim of kidnapping and being tortured, that individual is none other than General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. If it is established that indeed it was Muhoozi who directed this torture and participated in this torture, would the ambassador agree that General Muhoozi Kainerugaba should also be prosecuted? If it is established that indeed.
That is my question?
Yes, that is a question for you.
No. I'm not going to to answer for Kainerugaba or even Kakwenza. I am here to defend my president, President Yoweri Museveni. So
thank you. That's a good answer.
You can
I'm satisfied with that answer.
Bring him to this panel. Just a minute.
No, but you answered it. You answered it. This is my time. This is my time.
Moderator, this is not a question and answer talk show. At least I've been in quite a number of them. And therefore, if you want to ask such a question, you can answer Kainerugaba himself direct.
I'm satisfied with that answer.
I am not Lynn. I am not a spokesperson of Kainerugaba.
Thank you. That's a good answer.
I'm a spokesperson of President Yoweri Museveni.
Let's
Thank
hear
you, Ambassador.
from
I'm satisfied.
Sorry.
I'm satisfied with that answer. That's a very telling answer, and I'm glad it's being recorded. Thank you, Ambassador, for that honest answer. Because basically the answer is yes. So now let me respond to a number of issues that have been raised so far. On the issue of Guantanamo Bay and the implication that because I'm here in the United States, that perhaps that's something that I would somehow tolerate while I condemn atrocity in Uganda. Anybody can Google Guantanamo Bay and Black Star News and see that we are one of the leading publications in terms of condemning the crimes in Guantanamo Bay, calling for prosecution at the highest places, even the presidency itself in the United States. And we are happy to say, not only, of course, because of us, but because of the vast work of American media in condemning the atrocities in Guantanamo Bay, that many people have in fact been prosecuted, and that many people have in fact been compensated for the crimes committed in Guantanamo Bay. So to use that as a rationalization, the crimes being committed in Uganda, that is a very weak argument in my own view. Ambassador says he does not support the torture. And I'm glad that he said that on the record. He does not support kidnapping. I'm glad he said that on the record. And then he goes to say that the Ugandan dictator, General Yoweri Museveni, himself has also denounced torture. But we know that this individual speaks with both sides of his mouth. He can denounce torture on the one hand, while at the same time, of course, ordering these acts to be carried out. Who in his right mind believes that, as alleged by Kakwenza, that the president's son would not have authorization before carrying out these kind of atrocities, brazenly, not even hidden, sending so many people to arrest this writer without any arrest warrant, torturing him, and then allowing him to be brought before a judge, and then being taken back for more torture, his passport taken away, and he is the one that is being prosecuted. Just think about that. And why is that? Because even the judges know who the ultimate authority is in Uganda. So these judges are operating in a very strange universe. They did not go to court to become learned lawyers and to become judges, to be presiding over this kind of sham mockery of what the law is. And the ambassador knows that too. And that's why I said from the very beginning, I'm sure 100% that the ambassador is a much better human being than the person that is speaking in his official capacity today. It will be very difficult for him to say otherwise. Then the issue of these being isolated incidents. I submit that anybody who's listening to our discussion today, just Google, go on a Google search and put kidnapping, torture, and killings in Uganda. And you'll find that this issue has intensified, particularly after last year's stolen elections, and has been covered widely by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, by the BBC, by Al Jazeera, by The Guardian, by Deutsche Welle, by CNN. So unless somebody's saying all these media outlets are lying, it's also been covered by our local papers in Uganda, by The Monitor, by The Observer. All these media outlets are participating in some sort of a conspiracy and making up these false allegations. That is just incredible. Nobody can believe something like that. And then finally, because I don't want to take up too much time, I'm cognizant that others want to contribute. But the question was raised, why do these things actually happen why are they happening in Uganda? I think Miriam posed that question to the ambassador. I noticed the ambassador did not actually respond to that question. So let me attempt to respond to that question. That is happening because when you have an illegitimate regime, it does anything in its power to survive by any means necessary. And of course, torture is meant to silence and cow the population. According to Kakwenza's allegations, he was offered a house. He was offered money. He was offered a car to stop writing. Stop writing. In fact, he was offered a position in the legal department of the UPDF to get him to stop writing. And then one of the questions that he alleges they kept asking him as he was being tortured is, how do you know Milton Alimadi? Why are you writing articles for Black Star News? That's one of the questions allegedly they kept asking him repeatedly. So that is a regime that is very concerned by the exposure of the atrocities that is going on in Uganda before the world. This is my own belief. I think that this particular instance of the torture of Kakwenza went overboard. I believe because he was not willing to submit and to surrender and say, yes, I've been punished enough. After all, remember, this is the third time Kakwenza has been arrested and tortured. 2 times tortured in 2020 after he wrote his first book, Greedy Barbarian, about a corrupt dictator in a fictitious African country. My belief is that this book was read at the highest levels of government, and the general saw himself in the mirror and he saw too much similarity in what was in the book, and that was why Kakwenza was arrested the first time and tortured. He came out, he wrote a second book, Banana Republic, where writing is treasonous, arrested again and tortured. And then finally, over the social media postings, tweet, when he alleged that General Muhoozi is obese, arrested December 28, again, tortured viciously, this time went way beyond the line, and we saw the souvenir on his back that he's now carrying and the whole world is seeing. And that is where we've arrived. An illegitimate regime does anything necessary in order to keep its power when it knows that it does no longer have the support of the population of Uganda. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Milton. We have bad weather here. We just lost power, but let's continue, don't worry. Okay, now we kept mentioning that illegitimate, it is a dictatorial, the government is doing this intentionally. The president says this with one eye, and tomorrow it's a different story. I want to know, Miriam, we have seen that we're actually very confused as a public. Is this now government policy in dealing with people they disagree with, or the work of rogue elements in the security services working at the behest of individuals? I mean, the ambassador has mentioned errant individuals, but then who do they report to?
Lynn, I think it's only in Uganda where you are treated more worse than a murderer or a criminal of any heinous crime if you are opposing NRM government compared to the other criminal suspects. The biggest crime in Uganda is to challenge NRM government. And examples are all over. And this is not the first time. If you know, it's like on record that Colonel Kizza Besigye is like the most arrested person in the world. And no court has ever found him guilty of anything. And this arrest is not normal arrest. It's you are being tortured, then you are detained, and somehow human rights activists come out and protest for you. Then you are dumped in court. Then you are given bail. Tomorrow you are taken back. You are beaten on the roadside. You are tortured from everywhere, and you know, up to the point where they almost killed him. And he's not alone. When Kakwenza was coming out to court, when he was being dumped in court, and after a lot of noise, I mean, a lot of protests, and both national and international, there were so many other people coming out alongside him, like we talked about the NUP member who was also tortured beyond human. Like I'm sure whoever is still not able to function normally. These cases go on and on. In January, there were so many people who were grabbed and tortured, and then there is a previously, if we go back in history, there is a report. All human rights reports point out to people, if you oppose NRM government, you're going to be tortured. You are going to be intimidated into submission. Either they bribe you or they torture you. They do whatever they have to do to make sure that you don't challenge the NRM government. Like Milton said, it's all aimed at suppressing opposition. It's aimed at suppressing any criticism to the government. It's aimed at intimidating people into submission. If that is not an illegitimate government, that means you are getting consent and power by coercion. That's not legal. That's not legitimate power. That is illegitimate power, and that means you are in government because of coercion, not because of the support you are getting. But the question I keep asking myself is, how far are we going to go with this? Is it getting any better, or it's actually getting worse? What is the end to this? How do we get out of this mess? It's been here since 1986. As long as we have NRM government, this is the typical NRM government. No change, like their slogan. But up to when? Up to what do we need to do to end this? And I think Milton and Ambassador agree with us that this is not acceptable in 21st century. This is not how we're gonna move with the government. This is not how we're gonna move with the politics. We can no longer put up with politics of barbaric abuse of power. We can no longer put up with politics where people have more power than the others, where other people think the others are untouchable. Like you asked a question, if someone asked a question, I don't know who, that if they found that it's Muhoozi who ordered this torture, will he be charged in court? Which court can charge him? He also knows nobody can touch him. Right. So where are we headed with this? Ambassador was trying to compare this with the USA, but Ambassador, you know, in USA there is no president who is above the law. Never. It can't happen. That's the difference between a democracy and a legitimate dictatorship in Uganda.
Right. Thank you, Miriam. Right. We're having a very interesting conversation as we see who cannot face the law and who is free from the law. And I mean, we are all human beings, and Uganda is such a country that is bigger than us as people. Being Ugandan is really something we should all be proud of. But my problem right now is that we are scared as a country. We are worried as people because it seems this is something which is going to go on for as long as we know. Now, Ambassador, you've heard from from Miriam and Milton, and we ask ourselves, why is there no accountability? The president, I think in last year, when there were riots, was it last year or 2020? When there were riots and he came forward and said, the security personnel, we know them that were involved, they did A, B, C, D, then we're going to prosecute them. We don't know how far that has gone. We have no accountability. Nobody has told us. No, we haven't seen anybody come before the law. They arraigned some guys and it ended there. Many times he has come forward and told us that, you know, I do not like people being tortured. And he directs his security people to actually prosecute whoever is behind this, the perpetrators. But we never see anything happen. We never see all this come to fruition. We never see anything. So my question to you, Ambassador, is what must be done to ensure that the rights of civilians are protected? And not only the rights, their lives. Because, I mean, if you torture somebody now, what if he dies? What happens to his family? All those questions, you know, keep coming up. And then the army. I don't know if, Ambassador, you're noting this down. Because over the years, we have seen that the most perpetrators of torture and inhumane acts are security personnel, but particularly the military. Is there a possibility that the army can be stopped from being involved in law enforcement? And also the culture of impunity. The police and military officers violate human rights so freely, and nobody's holding them accountable. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lynn. It is again a mouthful because there are all sorts of insinuations against the government and so on and so forth. One of them is that, of course, that it is a dictatorial government that we have in place, that it is illegitimate in the sense that probably it's not really, it hasn't been appropriated by the citizen of the country. Fine, that's okay, because I have not seen in my lifetime as now a senior citizen of the country, when we have had regular and predictable elections. Regular and predictable elections in the country. Because in the past, governments would change by use of the gun, shooting guns into government and so on and so forth. As we speak now, at least one thing is sure, and that is regular and predictable elections after 5 years. So those of you who want to change government, I think because I think it was Miriam who was suggesting, or was it asking? I think she must have been asking, but what do we do? What do we do? The course of action is very simple as far as I'm concerned, and that is you just come and take part in the elections. Of course, you would say that is also not possible because when you come for elections, definitely they're going to be rigged. Probably, quite like I can whisper to you that you can take up extra constitutional means of changing government, which is also illegal. But the fact of the matter is that I'm not aware of a time when elections have been as predictable and regular as they have been every 5 years after we did the referendum of 2005 especially. Every 5 years we have got elections, every 5 years. And whoever wants to take part in these elections, I remember Laro Tunu flew all the way from the US to come and take part in those elections. He subjected himself, although I was very disappointed because when he came to take part in those elections, after coming all the way from the US, he even failed to vote for himself. His polling station, he was absent. Even from the political party that he tried to lead, he was absent, and everybody was looking for him. And so who do you blame? If you lead a political party into an election and you can't even vote for it, and you can't vote for yourself as a presidential candidate because he was on the ballot paper. So, and as far as I'm concerned, the means of changing government, should people want, is provided for under the supreme law of the land, and that is the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda, namely using elections. So that has already been prescribed, that we can change government, and therefore to refer to the government as illegitimate when it has been elected every other time by a whooping majority, I think is to get involved in some level of intellectual gymnastics that probably don't add up in as far as I'm concerned. But to go back to the point which Lynn raised, the issue of accountability as far as these issues we're talking about today, I think definitely it takes time for the measures that are done in order to account for the actions of those who operate outside the law when they're executing government responsibilities. It's a process, again, for us to really reach that stage where we feel that the law enforcement, for instance, organs in the country follow the law up to the letter. It also takes time. I'm a very good student of history, and nobody can lecture to me because I've studied the US and I know exactly what has been happening, because it has taken them to reach where they are 250 years. 250 years, in other words, 2.5 centuries to reach where they are. But even as we speak, the US grapples with democratic issues. For instance, one of the issues they've been grappling with is campaign finance. That still remains something that boggles the minds of Americans. So really, it reached perfection, and Uganda only had a referendum in 2005. That means that we've had this level of democracy of ours in, moreover, an African context for just a few years, less than even 20 years, for us to really, so only 20 years of really trying democratic practice. And I don't believe that the country has got enough angels in order to have that level of democracy that ensures accountability and all these kinds of things. But I've also pointed out that right now, as we speak, this government has put in place not only pieces of legislation, but also bodies whose job it is to make sure that human rights observation is followed to the latter, despite the many hurdles along the way. And I mentioned, I remember at the beginning of this conversation, that we have, for instance, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, whose job it is to observe human rights and to really, and it issues reports every after the other time. And these reports are subject to discussion in the parliament and so on and so forth. And therefore, in my view, yes, we still have issues when it comes to observing human rights. We still have issues when it comes to accountability, accounting for the actions, and especially in this special connection, since we are talking about human rights, issues of accountability, issues to do with the way we do accountability. But we have made significant progress in as far as addressing the dire situation that we were in the 1970s, in the early 1980s, and part of probably the early 1990s. So issues of accountability are extremely important for us. And therefore, it is important, and Lynn, you are asking a very, very important question, that where are these people to do accountability? In my view, the reports are released by the Human Rights Commission. I don't want to listen to Human Rights Watch from the US, because those are part of those who have been lecturing to us, and we are in the situation where we are because of their colonial, a situation that they imposed in most of these African countries, and therefore it became extremely. They left us, for instance, with the armies that were purposed to serve the colonial masters, and therefore they planted all sorts of situations in our countries that have taken us too long to subdue and ensure that we move along with the path of accountability. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think accountability has improved remarkably in the subsequent years, especially after 1986, because, as I said before, yes, these bodies do exist, pieces of legislation exist. We have a level of freedoms of speech, which in my view does not mean that you're going to insult me and use derogative language against me, and especially the leadership of the country. You must be very, in other words, when you write, Kakwenza, when he writes, he needs to ensure that he doesn't insult others. Yes, granted, he has his rightful choice not to agree with the government, and I'm aware that, for instance, he's an FDC activist, which is not a crime in my view. Fine, that is his choice. Like everybody has a choice to make, and as far as associating with political parties is concerned. So issues of accountability, yes, we have improved so much in as far as accounting for the actions of those who are in power by pieces of legislation that have been in place. Probably we need now to move a little faster and get to another level where those who have the powers to arrest and so on and so forth do it according to the law. Because at least the president has been very clear about that he doesn't support torture, and therefore the security forces ought to do that. But I don't want to believe, nobody's going to convince me that the situation is as dire as it was in the 1970s, that it was as dire as it was in the 1980s. We have improved except that we need to do much more than what we are doing.
Thank you, Ambassador. Very interesting. I'm glad you have appreciated that we have made strides, and hopefully soon we can make better. We can try and redeem the image of the country. Now, Milton, you have heard from the Ambassador, you've heard from Miriam, and here as the Diaspora show on Civic Space TV, we often want to find solutions that are diaspora, connected. So as diaspora people, Ugandan in diaspora, with all these things going on in your country, I will say that, because as much as you people stay there, this remains your country of origin. So fine, with all your countries looking bad, how can the diaspora community help redeem the country, the image of the country? Milton.
Well, you want, I presume, an honest and straightforward answer.
Absolutely.
And we have obviously been discussing the details of this particular torture incident, but to give you an honest answer in terms of how we can improve the situation is to start having legitimate government in Uganda. A government that owes its stay in power based on the consent of the people. So when the ambassador talks about having regular, predictable elections, the part that he left out was having regular, predictable, rigged elections. And that's a key part. How many times did Dr. Besigye win? Was he sworn into office? Who does not believe that Bobi Wine won the last presidential election? Has he been sworn into office? So you can't have an election where one of the players, the participants, is also the referee. He appoints the people who announce the results of the elections. That's not possible. That's a sham election. Reminds you like when we were growing up, some of us liked, here in this country it's called soccer, back home it's called football. When one of the players would own the ball, and then when his team is leading, he's fine with it. Then when the other team is about to tie the game up or take the lead, then he says, oh, it's time to go home. He grabs the ball and he leaves, That's the kind of situation we have in Uganda. So the ambassador knows those elections do not meet the standards of free, fair elections. And the United States, as we know, has supported this regime for decades. The United States gives this regime close to $1 billion a year in financial and military assistance. But even the United States, for the first time, was very explicit about the outcome of this election, both when Donald Trump was still president, and then after Joe Biden became president. And if you go to the website of the State Department, you'll find a statement saying the elections were neither free nor fair. And this is coming from the principal country that has been supporting this regime for such a long time. So that to me would be one of the critical and most important solutions, to have a government that is accountable, that owes its regime, its stay in power, to the consent of the electorate in Uganda. And then government would not have to go to these extreme measures of maximum intimidation and repression in order to cow and silence the population. That if you dare to challenge us, this is what will happen to you. And in terms of, the ambassador keeps going back to, oh, we should be happy, we are no longer in the 1970s. Oh, we should be happy. We're no longer in the 1980s. I submit that the papers that are in Uganda, they can do the surveys, the Monitor, the Observer, and people will clearly indicate that at this moment in our history, we're at a worse time to that period that Ambassador keeps bringing up. But let's give him that. Let's give him that as a concession. Yes, take it. In your mind, we are in a different, but at a better place. But some people are above the law. He says the people involved in the atrocities should be held accountable. That means they should be prosecuted. But then when he's asked, should that include General Muhoozi? Oh, no. I'm here as a spokesperson for General Museveni, not Muhoozi. Meaning even the ambassador knows certain people are above the law. If the name I had asked was not General Muhoozi, he would not have been trying to twist and go left and right. He would have given a direct response and said, yes, anyone involved in these activities should be prosecuted. And we know why he could not give that response. And that goes back to what Miriam suggested, that there are some people that are above the law, and we know that, and it seems to me that the people of Uganda have reached a limit. They're tired. Kakwenza does not enjoy being tortured. And as far as I know, he's not an insane person. So he's tortured the first time, he comes out and he shares with the world what they did to him. They take him back in, tortured a second time, comes out and shares again his experience to the world. Tortured a third time after the arrest, December 28. And if they could get access to him, they would probably torture him again. And this time, he may not come out alive. Many people have been abducted and tortured, have been killed. These have been reported and documented. And as I said, anybody who wants the details of the massive campaign of kidnapping, torture, and killing that started after the rigged election, all they have to do is a Google search. When all these corporate media start writing about these issues, and somebody suggesting, oh, maybe they all sat up together and said, oh, let's make up these stories. That is just preposterous. You Google any of the major media outlets, in addition to the local ones in Uganda. And then finally, I to that comment when the ambassador says, oh, it's taken the US 250 years and so on and so forth. And then he says, oh, we've come a long way in the African context. That to me is unacceptable. There's no African context. There's no European context. We Africans were the original human beings in the world, as the ambassador knows. So we can't say because some European oriented or controlled countries are at this level, then we should somehow think we should be at an inferior role. That does not make sense. Human beings started in East and Central Africa, in the Rift Valley. The ambassador says he knows history, so he knows that history. Had we not migrated to other parts of the world 100,000 years ago, it means all the inhabitants of the world would be Africans. It's only after we went to other parts of the world, under the very cold climatic conditions in those days, over tens of thousands of years, human beings adapted to the environment. And that is why we now have Europeans, Asians, and so forth. So we should not be taking our standards from anybody in the world, since we were the original human beings in the world. So I hope the ambassador will not go back to that reference of, oh, Africa again. But if he chooses to, that's fine.
I think to continue from what you've said, yeah, there is nothing like African. The ambassador seems to insinuate that Africans, we don't deserve to be treated as humans. that we don't deserve any right to even exist because we are Africans. And I think, Milton, you've really put it rightly that Africans actually should be the leading role models of how humans should be living, because we are the origin of not only mankind, but origins of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And Ubuntu started with Africans, and that's what we would call like democracy or human rights in the Western context. But it's something that was started by our ancestors, and that's, if we are supposed to live like Africans, that's what we should be emulating. And there is nowhere in our culture, in our life, that prescribes that one human is supposed to destroy another simply because they don't like them, or they don't believe what you believe, or they want to live differently from you. So the fact that the NRM government is there destroying other people simply because they are opposition, this is beyond even intimidation. It's like, if you can't support me, you either die and I live. But my question is, how do we get out of that quagmire as Ugandans? We can't have free and fair elections. The military is on top of the government, on top of the politics. Today, the military is more important than the politicians, and they are above the law, they are untouchable. So what's the way forward for other people if you can't organize? Kakwenza was tortured today, but previously it's Bobi Wine, it's NUP supporters, it's FDC supporters, it's then previously it was other opposition leaders, the previous UPC-DP leaders. Every other person who does not support Museveni particularly, you have to be oppressed, you have to be tortured, you have to be abused in any other way, even economically suppressed. There are so many people who have lost their businesses because they don't support the government. And today the organizing space is really limited for the opposition. How do you organize for change? So I think we need to think about that. How do we move forward as a government? How do we organize to see things are getting better? The question I have for you, Ambassador, is do you think we should have an independent electoral commission where the other opposition leaders are players in deciding the fate of the election?
Well, it's a matter of conjecture, because let me give you an assumption. Assuming that, yes, that becomes law, that everybody participates in the choosing of the membership of the electoral commission. Now, and that has happened I've seen it happen in 1980. Assuming that a group of political parties come together against one, what would happen? I mean, you can bring as many people to the electoral commission. I'm not saying that's a bad idea, that actually the constitution of the electoral commission should take care of all the shades of opinion in the country. I am not against that one, but assuming that, yes, after doing that, then members of the electoral commission from, say, 5 political parties gang up against 2, and they really steadily move towards ruling out the other 2, what would happen? For me, it's just a matter of conjecture. The fact of the matter is that, yes, discussions about this matter should continue, so that at the end of the day, there is something that is agreeable to the country and to everybody, so that there are no complaints after elections. And that can only come through discussions. I'm aware that, for instance, right now as we speak, there is what is called IPOD that brings together the political parties in Uganda. And under the auspices of that, there are quite a number of things that have been done in the interest of all shades of political opinions in the country. And that is the only way to go as far as I'm concerned. And through those discussions, yes, who knows that, for instance, tomorrow political parties are going to agree and then the law is changed so that the constitution or the membership of the electoral commission are actually a reflection of all shades of opinion in the country. That definitely, as far as I'm concerned, is something that is subject for discussion, and we're going to continue talking about it and impress it upon all those who are in leadership in the country to make sure that something along those lines is done. But I wanted to respond because, I mean, the argument still continues that this government is illegitimate, that there is rigging, and every other time we have elections, the NRM rigs those elections. But what surprises me is that despite the fact that the opposition in the country actually claims that those elections are rigged, they continuously take part in them. How I wish that they would take a position and say that enough is enough. Elections have been rigged. We're not taking part in those elections. But every other time we have elections, every 5 years, as I said before, we have regular and predictable elections. The opposition jump onto the bandwagon and they take part in those elections, and then they complain after that these elections have been rigged. Now, there was also a suggestion that Besigye and Bobby Wine won elections. Fine, that's a good idea. It's just a matter of conjunction as far as I'm concerned, because I was actually in the country when those elections were taking place. And I know exactly what happened, because you cannot afford to have a political party based on tribal sentiments winning elections in our country. That doesn't happen. Even in the 1960s, it happened because one part of the country, one part of Uganda decided to become tribalistic. At the end of the day, those who didn't subscribe to that kind of idea took the day and they won elections, because it happened also in the 1960s. That the rest of the regions in the country actually ended up winning elections because people are smart enough to sieve through these things, and then they say who means well for the country. So I can assure you with no doubt in my mind that Bobby Wine never won those elections, not even Kizza Besigye won those elections, which are alleged to have been rigged by the NRM and so on and so forth. Because even after Besigye claimed that those elections were rigged, in the subsequent elections, he took part. Because he's 2006, he said elections had been rigged by President Yoweri Museveni. 2011, he said elections had been rigged by President Yoweri Museveni. 2016, Kizza Besigye came and took part in those elections. So then who is to blame? Because every other time, if you know that taking part in those elections is an exercise in futility, then I don't see the wisdom of somebody taking part in those elections. So as far as I'm concerned, if you subject yourself, that's why at sometimes I think I sympathize with Olaro Tunu, because he came and led the UPC into elections in 2016, and then he never even bothered to vote for himself, not even for his political party, because I think at the end of the day, he must have convinced himself that probably the elections are going to be rigged, and he actually didn't take part in those elections. But for Kizza Besigye and the rest in the park who subject themselves to these elections every other time, and then after those elections have happened, they complain that they've been rigged, I think that is the highest level of intellectual dishonesty as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Ambassador, while we talk all these interesting conversations, visiting the past as well, I wonder, what's the way forward? Because we seem to have accumulated a lot of anger, a lot of animosity. We have accumulated a lot of, we are not really proud of what our country has become, even when we're saying that it is much better than it used to be back then. It goes without saying, yes, things were really bad. Some of us were not there, but yes, we have read the stories, we have read history. But should we keep relying on the past for the future now that is now? How can we better our nation? How can we, improve what is going wrong? Because people in circles are saying, you know what? I think we're going back to the past. Which past the government keeps referring to? We have moved from. But again, we seem to be seeing cases of this. As a country, how then do we move forward? How then do we progress? Is there anything as progress that it does and we're not making it? But then if it is there, How then do we do it? Miriam, I don't know if you spoke when I was.
I can answer because you seem to be asking me.
Yes.
I don't know that I should answer. Fantastic. Thank you very much. What do we do? Miriam also asked the same question. What do we do? It's a very important question because for me, discussion is the mother of all, although they say that the other one is the mother of all innovations. But for me, as far as I'm concerned, actually, discussions are the mother of subsequent actions that will lead to improvement in our political system in the country. And what we are doing today and in the subsequent times of having discussions about what affects all the citizens in the country, both within the boundaries, because I also live outside the boundaries of the country, is something that is probably a plus in as far as our country is concerned. These discussions are extremely important, and I wish those who matter in the country could take stock of all these things that we are having a discussion about, and then make sure that these discussions and what comes out of them and the subsequent actions actually are a reflection of the future times being more prospective and more comfortable for everybody, all citizens of the country. So this discussion is, as far as I'm concerned, a part and parcel of the way forward. The second one is probably a continuous improvement of the pieces of legislation, which are actually a cobweb, because we have so many of them. There ought to be a continuous improvement in the pieces of legislation that we have, to try as much as possible to improve the political structures that we have. Of course, I think it must have been Miriam who raised this, that the constitution of the Electoral Commission ought or needs to be probably discussed about, and then probably a way forward is worked out in such a way that all shades of political opinion are reflected in as far as the membership is concerned. All of those, and for me, I believe that there is nothing under the sun that we can't discuss. And of course, it is also important to keep engaging in the various fora that we have, especially when it comes to political parties, because these are the ones who take center stage when elections are actually taking place. So the structure of IPOD should be taken seriously, and whoever opts out of it, I think is doing an injustice to our country. IPOD, yes, it is at its infancy. Of course, it is being funded by European countries and so on and so forth. And as far as I'm concerned, it is something that needs to be improved and given more teeth to bite, so that through IPOD we can realize many of these things we are talking about in the direction of improving the political situation in the country. So the way forward is again something that we can do. It is doable, and the discussions are part and parcel of that. The other one is through discussion, IPOD and these talk shows and so on and so forth, pressing forward to ensure that we reform some of these laws that we have in place, that people feel are not, because I know I belong to political parties and I know how they operate, because the political party is a bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy works in such a way, unless we want to hide our heads under the sun, like the proverbial ostrich. Political parties are like a bureaucracy, because they want to retain power. A bureaucrat would want to retain power. They would want to retain the control of resources, because it is through the control of resources that then you can dispense them to acquire support. So any political party, be it in Africa, be it in Europe, be it in the Americas, the purpose for which political parties are formed is basically to control resources, both human and financial, you know? So having said that, these bureaucracies that we have in place, whether in individual political parties or at national level, the political party which is in the government, how do we now tame these animals called the political party, or the political party actually which is the government? How do we tame it so that every citizen in the country becomes a beneficiary of the reforms that are supposed to be put in place so that the political atmosphere improves in the country? Those are my views.
Right, thank you, Ambassador. We are still looking at the challenges we are facing as a country, and of course, torture is one of them. We are looking at people being above the law. We are looking at accountability, and still we seem to be running away from the fact that, yes, we still need to hold people accountable. And yet we are heading into very uncharted places where there's a lot coming our way. Right, so now I want to, Milton, you and the ambassador having such an interesting conversation in regard to the history of the country, to the politics, to the political sphere, and all those things. I want to allow me take us back to the issue of torture, because it goes without saying that it is eating up on our society as a country. We are not seeing much progress with the perpetrators of these crimes. And I remember that Uganda actually signed the Rome Statute, yes, of the International Criminal Court, and said abduction, torture, and enforced disappearances are crimes rather against humanity. It crossed my mind that should we now petition the ICC? And also take note, Milton, that when Kakwenza was released, yes, when he was released, and we saw all those problems that he went through, and then he disappeared from the country, is he setting a precedent that whoever is tortured, instead of facing whatever he has been, thrown at, whatever has been thrown at him or her, should therefore run away from their country? Shouldn't they stand and, face the law and also try to get the perpetrators into where they're supposed to be?
Let me first of all start by answering the question of Kakwenza. He's in need of medical treatment, right? And that's the main reason why he had to leave the country. You saw the condition of his back, the condition of his feet, the condition of his thighs. And we all know the state of medical condition facilities in Uganda, the hospitals. That is why, as we speak right now, the Speaker of Uganda's parliament is not being treated in a Ugandan hospital. He flew on a Uganda Airlines plane to be treated in the United States, reportedly at a cost of $500,000 taxpayer money. So that explains why Kakwenza cannot be in Uganda. If he wants to continue being alive, he needs decent treatment. And I understand he's trying to see if he can get treatment in Germany. Kakwenza has become a serious threat to this government because the government does not like the example that Kakwenza has set. That you may torture me, but I will never bow. Just like Bobby Wine actually set a tremendous precedent when after the dictator also went, they each campaigned for different individuals, and the candidate that Bobby Wine campaigned for won those by-elections. And Bobby Wine was punished severely after those by-elections. He was arrested in a vicious manner. His driver was shot and killed. They broke down the hotel room where he was, allegedly beat him with hammers. And they seem to like using pliers because, they also use those instruments to attack his genitals. When he was produced in court, he was on crutches and could barely walk. He left the country for treatment. And many people said, oh, this is the end. The regime has succeeded in silencing this young new voice. What happened? Bobby Wine returned to his country. And of course, the rest is history. Ugandans mobilized and rallied about him. And they came and they voted overwhelmingly. We all saw the signs of people showing up in the campaigns. I remember at one town in particular, the regime cordoned off the entrance to their town with soldiers. We saw images of thousands of people walking through swamps to circumnavigate the barricades to come to listen to the candidate whom they had cast their trust in. And obviously he went on, as I said, and I maintain, to win those elections, but he has not been sworn in yet. Now, the torture of Kakwenda presents a huge problem for the government, not only domestically in Uganda, but also internationally. When your government relies on about $1 billion from the United States, about another $1 billion from the EU countries, that is significant. But in order for you to receive that money, and another $1 billion from the IMF last year, and from the World Bank, about 700 million in the last 2 years. In order to be receiving that kind of money, you need to provide these Western countries and establishments, World Bank, IMF, these are Western establishments. They're the majority shareholder, the United States in particular. You have to provide them what is called plausible deniability. In other words, they may know these activities that you are conducting, including the torture, the kidnapping, the killings. They know the killings. After all, in December, they sanctioned General Candido. The U.S. Treasury Department took sanctions against him, accused him of personally participating in the torture, the killing, including sexual tortures. And of course, as you know, now this same general has been made the commander of the Uganda police. And of course, these countries that give them money also following keenly. But the main point is that you have to provide them with plausible deniability. You have to give the World Bank, the IMF, the State Department, the opportunity to say, oh, we are looking into it. We don't know whether the regime is really doing what you're alleging. They need that in order to work with you. You know, generally they don't really care too much whether you're abusing human rights. They know that. But when you remove plausible deniability, you make it difficult for them to pretend that they don't know that you're committing all these kind of crimes, especially when Kakwenda comes out with the souvenir on his back. Then it makes it difficult for them, because now members of Congress, senators are going to be saying, wait a minute, why is US taxpayer dollars going to this country? And some senator is going to be holding Kakwenda's photograph, you know, in the Senate. Then it makes it difficult for the State Department and for the White House to continue business as usual. So as a result of this torture of Kakwenda and the fact that he came out alive with the souvenir on his back, I can see some serious action coming from the US Senate. And that would obviously impact the US policy toward Uganda. I understand before he left the country, some Western diplomats actually got to see his back, and some of them were crying in tears. And I would not be surprised just looking at that photograph alone. So you raise the issue of accountability and the ICC. As you know, the ICC can also be very political. In the ICJ, which is sometimes people confuse the two, the ICJ is sometimes called the World Court. That's the International Court of Justice. Just made a final decision ordering Uganda to pay to the Congo $325 million US related to the crimes committed when Uganda occupied the Ituri region of the Congo. So that was adjudicated long ago, but Uganda challenged, and they've been going back and forth. Now they came out with the final decision. But this is the final point I'm going to make. At the time of those, when that issue was tried for what really amounts to war crimes committed by Uganda's military under the command of General Yoweri Museveni as Commander-in-Chief, the crimes included plunder of resources, massacres of people, and mass rapes and burning and destruction of their property. So the Congo took those same allegations to the ICC, And the ICC started an investigation of these alleged crimes by Uganda's military. And according to an article which is not widely discussed in the Wall Street Journal on June 8, 2006, according to this article, General Museveni himself picked up the phone and called Kofi Annan, who was at that time the Secretary General of the United Nations, and asked him, he said, Mr. Annan, could you block this criminal investigation? Because General Museveni knew he would be indicted, like Mohammed al-Bashir, the dictator of Sudan, who was ultimately also indicted for crimes in the Sudan. So Annan said, I don't have the power to block those investigations. That article is there, anybody can read it. But somebody who is comfortable using General Museveni as an agent of their imperial agenda blocked that criminal investigation so far. But that means that investigation at any point could be allowed to be continued. And I think when we see things like the torture of Kakwenza, the whole world now becoming familiar with what's going on in Uganda, I would not be surprised if that type of investigation is revived and using the same set of evidence in which Uganda was found liable by the ICJ, which prosecutes the civil aspect. The ICC would most likely also indict Uganda's General Museveni. But here's my final point now. I know the ambassador is in a difficult position as a spokesperson for the government. But I know the ambassador wishes better for Uganda. He wants a Uganda that is peaceful, democratic, prosperous, using its resources to develop Uganda. Because there's no need why Uganda and all these other African countries, with all the resources, we should be taking any assistance from the West when they need our resources to build their wealth. What we lack is political enabling environment. In the 21st century, we don't need a country where one person has been running it for 36 years. And in private, I'm sure the ambassador would agree with this, if he was not speaking in his official capacity. If we create the perfect enabling environment, which, by the way, Uganda was on the way to doing. We had a constitution that had term limits and age limits so that we could pave the way for other people to come and pursue their development agenda for Uganda. If we have that in Uganda and other African countries, within 10 years, we could start enjoying the kind of income that some of these so-called developed countries enjoy using Africa's resources. So I would hope that the ambassador would come to the right side of history and say, yes, let's create political environments where we are not spending 90% of our energy on political contestation, fighting for power, to try to remove somebody who has been there for 36 years. Let's go back with the term limits. Let's go back to the age limits. Let's have independent electoral bodies that can administer free and fair elections. It's not rocket science. We're in the 21st century. So that would be my final point.
Thank you very much, Milton, for that. We have 7 minutes to the top of the hour. That means we'll be closing the show at the top of the hour. And so, Miriam, in your conclusive remarks, we are at this point. We look very ugly. Things don't look very nice for us. We are struggling. We are working hard. We are trying our best, according to Ambassador Henry Mayega, and according to Milton, there's still need to respect the Constitution and perhaps make things right. It's not too late, I hope. Miriam, in conclusion, we have looked at the state of the state torture in Uganda. We have looked at the state of accountability in Uganda. We are still looking at things going wrong in Uganda. How then do you think we can move forward?
Thank you, Lynn. I think Milton has put it right. We need a politically enabling environment. We need to clean up our politics, and we have capacity to do so. But we all need to be patriotic and stop being selfish. I think NRM government and Museveni are all about power, retaining power for themselves, and they don't think about the future of Uganda. They don't think about Uganda as a nation, Uganda prospering beyond them, even for the next generation, for even the current generation. They're living like no better than colonialists. It's like there are some people just coming in to eat and go. As long as they are eating, everything is fine. An example of the speaker going abroad for medical treatment. He's not even the first. That's what every other government leader does when they get sick because they can't stand the poor health conditions in Uganda. But the contrast, the speaker is allowed to use taxpayers' money to go for foreign treatment. But on the other hand, Kakwenza, who was tortured by the same government, is not allowed to step out of the country to get treatment from even on his own money. The magistrate, I'm sure, was ordered to deny him his passport, access to his passport, so that he doesn't go and get treatment abroad. So this is the government. It's more like Animal Farm. They are all about maintaining themselves and their people. And
but Miriam, in this case, they were treating him as a criminal.
Getting passport and going for treatment doesn't mean he was going to stay there. And what type of a criminal? What type of a criminal anyway that deserves that inhuman treatment and punishment? It's like they are detaining him, like Milton said, so that the world doesn't see their heinous acts and how they have tortured him. But they didn't think about his life. So suppose he dies in Kampala, then his story could be forgotten and the regime goes on. It's good he ran away. He's not a fugitive. He's a victim, and I hope he gets better treatment and leaves, so that tomorrow he seeks accountability for the torture that has been meted on him, because someone should pay for that crime. But to conclude on the general topic about the way forward for Uganda, actually it's very interesting and sad that Milton alluded to the ICJ case of Uganda and DRC Congo. The same crimes that the court indicted Uganda on: torture, sexual assault of innocent citizens, plunder. This is what happened this is what was committed by NRA well far in the 90s and 2000 there, but the same things are still being done by the same regime, and even though they are in power and they are doing it using state institutions, but the same things like torture, I think they've been torturing people all the way. That's how they work. So we can't say it's something that happened yesterday, or today it was Kakwenza, but yesterday it was innocent DRC citizens, where Uganda went to Congo illegally, tortured their citizens there, committed all crimes, including sexual assault and plunder, and now they've been indicted. But the sad part is that the Ugandan taxpayers, the innocent citizens, are the ones to pay for those crimes. So we are paying politically, we are paying financially, we are paying with our life for the crimes of NRM government. How far are we going to go on with that? And as we conclude, our question is, all of us, including Ambassador Mayega, who said is for the government, the question we should ask ourselves is, what type of Uganda do we want? And how are we going to build it? And how do we move forward? I mean, a lot of things has been done. When we compare ourselves with Idi Amin, it's like we don't want to move on. Idi Amin was the worst case scenario in the world. It's like slave trade, it happened. So should we keep referring to the worst? It's like you're looking at a kid and you're abusing a kid and you say, hey, after all, your mother was raped. So was that rape justified? And should the kid continue to suffer because the mother was also suffering? So how long are we going to pay the price of having suffered through Idi Amin? It's like NRM saying, hey, after all, Idi Amin tortured you, we can also torture you. But I think we deserve a better Uganda. And like they said, if it's the politics that is going to build the economy, without good politics, we can't move forward economically. And all those songs of NRM saying, oh, we're going to get middle income will stay elusive like they have been, because there is no political enabling environment which would attract investors and investment to come to Uganda. With that, let me conclude. Let me say thank you for everyone who has participated in this show, and
thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you, Milton. Ambassador Henry, do you have anything to say as we wind up? Like 2 minutes?
Okay. Thank you very much. I just want to assure Milton that I'm actually on the right side of history, because I am interested in my country. I remember when I left university as a fresh graduate, a friend of mine who went to South Africa to work there and even prepared a work permit for me, and he told me that you come to South Africa so that we work from here. I said, no, I will stay in my country. I got out of my country in 2015 after almost 30 years of working inside the country. And it's very important for us to note that each one of us is very interested. Just like President Kyomugasho, I don't agree the suggestion that he has no interest in the country. He is as interested in Uganda as any other person. Now, I'm disappointed a little bit, Lynn, because when we were still talking about the torture and so on and so forth, and I remembered that actually shortly before the elections, early last year, because I believe in holistically talking about these things, because NRM supporters were also subjects. They were also targets of torture. And I remember that one of the boys who was an NRM supporter was actually nailed. His hands were nailed together by in quotes, those who were in the opposition along, I think, the bypass, the northern bypass. And the hands were nailed together. The pictures were there for everybody to see, and these were people meting out that kind of torture. Of course, somebody can say that these people, of course, were not state actors. Fine, that's okay. But still, this is something that probably we need to appreciate, all of us, that torture is something that we shouldn't tolerate. So I should have expected that all of us should have been on the same page talking about torture, either that which is done by state actors or that which is done by those in the opposition, because this boy definitely was a target of those people. Now, when it comes to the legitimacy of the country, of the government, President Kyomugasho, I don't want to agree that it's, because there are all sorts of reflections of how still acceptable the government is. For instance, when the elections of the LOC structure happened in the country, they were won by the NRM overwhelmingly by 80%. They gave elections in the 15 universities that took place earlier this week. Out of 15 given elections, the NRM won 11. So if that doesn't speak to the legitimacy and the popularity of this mass party called NRM, then I don't understand what probably a mass party looks like. Now, the 36 years that Museveni has been in the government, it's too long and not tolerable. But and I'm only simply saying that those who are opposed to President Kyomugasho, I think, should just go ahead and mobilize, and probably through elections, they change government, because that is the only constitutional way how we can do it. Otherwise, I just want to remind ourselves that between 1979 and 80, we changed the heads of state 5 times, from Idi Amin to Yusuf Lule to Godfrey Lukongo Binaisa to Paul Mwanga and then to Milton Obote. I was mature enough to understand what was going on, and that change of government didn't really produce the results that we had expected, that probably it would bring stability and these kinds of things. But the Yoweri Museveni administration at least has brought us stability, it has brought us the peace. I'm not saying that the NRM administration is full of angels. No, that's not what I'm trying to suggest. But what I'm trying to say is that significant progress has been made. And it's upon us as Ugandans to ensure that we build on that progress. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you, Milton. Thank you, Miriam. And those of you who have been watching, we'll definitely catch you again next time. But I want to urge everybody that Uganda is our country, and we ought to love it as much as we are required to, and also be as patriotic as possible, because there's no other country. We're not going to have another country as our own country. So we are blessed the way we are. Yes, there are lots of issues, but I'm certain together as one, we can definitely make Uganda a better country for all of us and for, of course, the future generation. Thank you very much. We'll catch you again next time. Bye-bye.